Welcome to the Press One for Nick podcast. My name is Nick Limsdahl. My guest this week is Baer. Jay brings 27 years of marketing and customer experience expertise and has worked with more than 700 companies, 700, no big deal, including 36 of the Fortune 500s. In his keynotes and webinars, Jay teaches how to grow businesses by giving customers a differentiated experience they notice and talk about. Welcome to the Press One for Nick podcast, Jay.
Thanks so much, Nick. Great to be here. I always wanted to ask what happens if somebody presses two. Like, who are they connected to? Are they connected to Jay Baer? We don't know. It's a mystery.
It could be Jay Baer or it could be Chuck Norris. The world has never got back to me if they hadn't pressed one.
Good to know.
So maybe I'm going to forward all the conversations from here on out on the Press 2 for Jay.
Press 2 for Jay podcast. Got it.
So one question that I ask every single guest, Jay, is what's one thing people might not know about you?
Well, I am a certified tequila sommelier. So I actually am licensed to set up tequila tastings and things like that. I grew up in Arizona, so I come by my agave spirits love geographically. So that's probably not something that everybody knows. And so I have a lot of tequilas and I collect them, and I go to Mexico a lot and study the miracle of agave spirits.
That is pretty sweet. One other thing that I've done a little bit of creeping on you, and that you are a certified barbecue judge.
Also true. Also a certified barbecue judge. I went to barbecue school to get that certification, which is a delicious school to attend. Terrible football team, but delicious school. It was really fun and learn a lot about not just how to make barbecue, but competitive barbecue is no joke, because individuals are competing for thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of prize money, and so you have to take it real seriously.
Yeah, I am a sucker for some barbecue.
Nice.
I love smoking barbecue, but if you were to have one more barbecue, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I always sort of feel like, and this will be controversial in the barbecue community, but I always feel like the pinnacle is a perfectly dialed in brisket, right? I just sort of feel like when it's done well, and brisket is the most temperamental of all of the meats, it's really easy to mess it up. And partially because briskets themselves pre-cooked vary a lot just as a cut of meat. So perfect brisket is probably my favorite, but I would say a really, really excellently created pulled pork, which is not as hard to make, but it's hard to make really delicious because they're always pretty good. It's like pizza, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the pork shoulder is the easiest thing for me. Obviously, yes. You get to do some other things that are a little bit more forgiving, but we could have the Nick and Jay Talk About Barbecue podcast, but
press one for brisket. Seems like
press two for brisket.
Yes, press 2 for brisket. There you go. We solved our problem.
So let's talk about, I want to talk a little bit about talk triggers.
Yeah.
Obviously your book is a huge success. But I have a bunch of questions that I want to drill down in. The first one I have is, how do you succeed in marketing and communication today? I think everybody else is kind of, it's not necessarily the fake it till you make it, but it's not just what's good, because good isn't good enough. So yes. How do you succeed?
Well, I think ultimately some of it's philosophical, is understanding that broad is flawed. This notion that reaching the most people is probably not actually going to work, because if you're going to try to reach everybody, ipso facto, you're not going to be hyper relevant for anybody, because everybody has different desires and different passions and circumstances and scenarios. And I think this is very true for things like podcasts, right? I've done a lot of podcast consulting. I've started at least 10 podcasts in my career. And the idea that you're trying to have as big of an audience as possible is really a misnomer. You want to have an audience that believes that this show is their favorite podcast, period. And if it's not anybody's favorite podcast, it's probably never going to succeed. It has to have that kind of resonance and relevance. So in order to have that kind of resonance and relevance, you've got to do something differentiated, which all sort of ties back to word of mouth. So I guess I would answer your question this way. Having the courage to understand that some potential customers are better than others and to structure your marketing accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah. So starting at the very top, you talked about the book is called Talk Triggers. What in the world, for people who may or may not know, what is a talk trigger?
A talk trigger, and I should say the book was written by my good friend Daniel Lemon. Most of the good parts were written by Daniel. Most of the funny parts were written by me. So just in full disclosure, a talk trigger is an operational choice that you make in your business that's designed specifically to create conversations. So a talk trigger isn't really marketing, it's really ops that creates a lot of marketing advantages. It's the thing that people notice and talk about that transcends whatever it is that you actually do or sell.
Yeah. And obviously it's not just one talk trigger, there's all sorts of them. So what are the different types?
There are several different types. I will say that you should only try to have one in your business. However, I get asked that question a lot. Well, should we have a couple different ones and maybe one for this product and one for that product? Don't. Because you end up competing with yourself for word of mouth, and that's not a great plan. So try and have one. So there are different ways of doing this. Talkable generosity is the one that you see most often, and that's when the business just gives the customer more than they expected. So much so that the customer then talks about it. So the example we use a lot in the book is DoubleTree Hotels by Hilton, where, as you probably know, Nick, they give you a piping hot chocolate chip cookie every time you check in to any of their hotels. Now, a hotel at some level is a hotel is a hotel. You're not gonna be like, wow, they have beds. Like, yeah, that's how hotels work.
Nailed it.
Wow. But we actually researched thousands of DoubleTree customers for the book and discovered that 34% of them have actually told a story about that cookie. Far more people have told a story about the cookie than have told the story about the hotel. So the cookie is, in fact, their talk trigger. And on a related note, DoubleTree spends less money on advertising than any other hotel in their competitive set. And it's because the cookie kind of is the ad and the guests are the marketing department, which is the best possible way to grow any business, is to have your customers grow it for you, but you've got to give them a story to tell. This idea that if you just run a good business, people will talk about it, that's not how human beings behave. Competency doesn't create conversation. It never has, and it never will. I mean, you want to run a competent business, obviously, because otherwise your customers will leave and never come back. But nobody talks about good. They talk about different. Like, I wouldn't say on this show, Nick, check this out. I had this experience last night. It was perfectly adequate. Right? I wouldn't ever tell you that because there's no story there. It's not worth talking about. So it has to be something a little different, like the cookie. That's talkable generosity. Other ways to do it: talkable speed, faster than customers expect. Talkable usefulness, so just more informative or more helpful than customers expect. Talkable attitude, and that's usually where you're like a little weirder or funnier, or just you're sort of worldview is a little different than customers expect, usually humor, but not always. And then talkable empathy, where you're just kinder, more, you just take better care of customers on sort of a human level. Those are the five ways to pull it off.
Yeah. So, and I think I really like that. Obviously, the DoubleTree, I've had like you said, the piping hot cookies, which are amazing and they're consistent. Yes. So how do you understand and try to realize from any organization what your piping hot cookie is a differentiator, as a talk track?
Yeah. So we talk about it in the book, and we do a fair bit of consulting on this point for brands as well. And the worst way to come up with a talk trigger is to just brainstorm it, to be like, hey, let's get pizza and sit in the conference room and come up with something fun. Like, if it was that easy, you'd already do it, right? It's not that easy. You have to come up with something that is A, talkable, right? B, is doable, because it has to be executed every day across the entirety of your business. It can't just be like hit and miss, and every once in a while it's got to be like, this is how we do it all the time, and that ain't easy. And then third, it has to make sense in the context of who you are and what you do. So there's a big difference between a talk trigger, which is an operational choice that is sustained, and sort of viral marketing, which is, well, let's do a stunt, right? Let's do a thing that people are going to talk about. Like, this isn't renting an elephant and walking it down Main Street with your logo painted on it, right? That's not what this is. And to make it work, you really have to do some pretty serious research. So ideally, talk to a bunch of customers and see what they've said about you in the past. Because usually when you do that kind of investigation, so look at reviews, social media, customer interviews, etc., talk to your customer service team, talk to your sales team, you will uncover the kernel of what your talk trigger could be. Not always, but oftentimes that kernel is there. I'll give you an example. Client we're working with right now is a national chain of irrigation companies. So they come to your home and they hook up all your sprinklers for your grass and your plants, and they take care of it and all that, and all over the country. Well, we did a big customer survey, talked to 7,000 customers. And it was really interesting, Nick. The customers kept saying in this survey, we can't believe how clean they leave our property. Like, they're digging holes to put in pipes, then they put the grass back and they clean up the dirt. There's no mud everywhere. And when we had interviewed the client, the company, they never mentioned that, never mentioned it at all. But then when we talked to the customers, tons of them mentioned it. And we're like, well, wait a second. If the customers are already leaning into this, maybe we should just lean into it further and come up with a differentiator that really emphasizes this notion of cleanliness. And so we're in the process of coming up with some ideas now. So once you sort of have that direction, what you want to do is figure out, all right, how do we operationalize it? And then you want to test it. So you take every nth customer, or only in one market, or only one product, or however you want to set up a control group. And then you launch the talk trigger to that control group. And then you check to see how often customers talk about it. And then if you have a sufficiently high sort of talkability rate, then you're like, aha, we got something here. And then you roll it out across the whole system. Yeah. So it takes a while. It's usually, when we do it from a strategy standpoint, it's usually at least 90 days and sometimes longer to actually get it up and running.
Yeah, I would assume, based off of what you just talked about, that 90 days would be a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah, if you can actually get it in market, right, fast enough, you might be able to get it done in 90 days. But as a practical matter, it's often from the time someone says, Jay, we want one, to, yeah, we got it, it's usually more like 6 months.
Yeah, it's so interesting that your client today, with digging up pipes and leaving the place clean. I literally went over to somebody's house the other day, and the exact same thing happened, except the opposite happened. It wasn't the cleanliness. It wasn't that they left it exactly how they left, and it was real clean. There was big old mounds of dirt, a foot and a half in the air, and it was around the whole house. It looked like I can't remember the movie was where it was like a scary movie where these things are going on the ground and you can just see the mounds rising.
the giant worms.
Yeah, the giant worms.
What is the name of that movie?
I'm gonna have to message you later.
Yes, we'll add that in post-production.
There it is, post-production. But the point is that he was frustrated and he wanted to come back, and he already called the company. He was waiting for them to respond, talking to supervisors. If he would have had a different experience and he'd have felt that it was clean, that would have been their talk trigger.
Yep.
So I do love that. You talked about how consistency is hard. So when companies feel that how does it feel from a customer's perspective when companies have inconsistent experiences? Yes.
I mean, customers hate it because they don't know what to actually expect.
Yeah.
Right? So when either it's a different location or just a different visit or a different interaction. I did a webinar earlier today about the challenges with omnichannel in a customer experience scenario, right? Where everybody wants to do omnichannel. We've got a mobile app and we've got a website, and we've got a retail store, and you can buy it on the mobile app and pick it up in the store, or you can buy it on the website and we'll ship it to you. And it's supposed to be seamless, right? But it very rarely is. And there's obvious reasons for that, right? It's a lot of different systems and a lot of different people, and it's not easy, right? But what happens is the customer's like, well, wait a second. And it goes back to when you're a kid, right? And you'd be like, well, mom told me this and dad told me that, right? That creates a lot of frustration when you get inconsistent stories, and it works the same way for customers. So they absolutely hate it. And that's one of the reasons why when it comes to a talk trigger, we always advise that it is available to essentially all customers. What a lot of brands will do when they're trying to create more word of mouth is they'll say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do something really special for a subset of the customer base. We're going to do something really special for our best customers or our biggest customers or our newest customers. And I understand why that becomes the conclusion, but you shouldn't do that. If you're trying to maximize the number of people who are telling your story, maximize the number of people who can tell the story, right? So it's not like DoubleTree only gives you a cookie if you're a Hilton Honors member. Everybody gets a cookie. Now, does that cost them way more money in flour and chocolate chips? Well, yeah. But if you didn't get a cookie, how could you possibly talk about the cookie? What you would say is, Nick was this guy in front of me and they gave him a chocolate chip cookie and all they gave me was a key card.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Because they had the gold card and I didn't.
Yes, exactly. Which I think some brands feel like that makes an aspirational scenario where the customer's like, well, then I'm going to do whatever possible to get a cookie next time. Maybe, or maybe the customer just gets pissed, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that just the way that works on the inconsistent experiences. And you talked about the omni-channel failure. I think it's so interesting because, one example you mentioned, kind of when my daughter says something to my wife, says, hey, can I go outside or can I have cake or whatever that situation is? And I say, and she says no, she immediately goes to me and says, hey, can I get cake tonight, Daddy? And I say, well, I don't know. Did you talk to your mom about it? But the same is true with omnichannel. If I had a bad experience, or if somebody has a bad experience and they call into chat, or they go into chat, or they go into email, or they call and they don't get what they want, they go to the next section and they try somewhere else because of the inconsistent experience.
Yes.
Which is a failure on the organization because they're not communicating like they should.
Yes.
Across all channels.
When I wrote the book, Hug Your Haters, which is a few years ago now, one of the things I researched in that project was what percentage of customers who use social media for customer service have already tried other contact mechanisms. And at that time, it was very, very high. It was like a Hail Mary pass. It was like, well, I didn't get what I wanted on the phone. I didn't get what I wanted on email. So, I'll see what this Twitter thing will do for me. Now, of course, customers have been taught that in many cases, social media is the best place to get customer service. So they're turning there first instead of last. But it's the exact same situation, Nick, where it's like, well, if I hear one thing from an email rep and I hear a different thing from a social media customer care rep, you're like, well, wait a second. How can this be the same company? And of course, as a practical matter, it's a different department. Maybe it's even a different company because maybe the social media part's freelanced or whatever. But it makes your brand look certainly less than organized, and I think impacts the customer-centric nature of your positioning at a pretty drastic level.
Yeah. And so what I see also with inconsistent experiences is that organizations don't necessarily eat the dog food that they're selling. So why is it important for organizations to kind of see what the consumers are doing from their perspective? Because you can ask the question or have the best guest or say, hey, we want to add this omni-channel, we want to add this whiz-bang technology, we want to add AI. But most of them don't actually ask what the consumer wants.
Yeah.
So why is that? Why is that so important?
Well, I mean, I think why it is so historically is not any kind of malevolence on the part of the brand. I think it's really more of an organizational shortcoming in that the group that is in charge of, hey, we want to care about customers more, is usually not the group who can actually effectuate any kind of operational change, right? Now we're seeing that shift in right now, actually, that this kind of convergence of marketing and customer experience in particular is accelerating rapidly. And in many organizations, the marketing department, because they're closer to revenue, has the ability to dictate operational circumstances more so than maybe a freestanding customer experience department or a customer experience strategist, et cetera. So that's good news. So I don't believe, like, I've been doing this a long time, and I don't believe that most companies don't care about the customer. I think it's they actually believe they care about the customer. And if you ask them, like, do you care about customers? Yes. In fact, the famous research from Bain many years ago, which said that 80% of companies say they deliver superior customer service, and 8% of customers agree. I think that pretty much, tells you all you need to know about this scenario, right? It's the difference is that most companies believe that customer experience and customer service is rooted attitudinally, and it's not. It's about actions, not attitudes. And so they talk a good game, but then they don't actually either investigate whether customers actually are satisfied. I feel like the status of customer satisfaction measurement is still really, really, really poor. So I don't think they spend enough time determining whether customers are satisfied. And then I think most companies are too quick to say, well, you satisfy most of them.
Yeah.
Think about a net promoter score survey, right? If you've got a net promoter score of, like, I don't know, 70 or something, which is very, very high in net promoter score circumstances, manifestly higher than most brands. That still means that like 20-25% of your customers would not recommend you.
Yeah.
And that's like, man, everybody gets bonused, right? Because only 25% of the customers don't like us. Like, so yeah, I feel like we are very easy, very, very quick to accept unhappy customers.
Yeah, I would say the problem with the net promoter score that you're facing, customer facing or prospect facing or PR facing, is how many of the actual customers did you actually survey? Did you survey all of them, or just the ones that were happy?
Yes, I definitely see that in some circumstances. The gerrymandering of the survey pool. Yes.
Yeah. So we talked about the importance of kind of, like I said, eating the dog food. But what's the importance of kind of keeping an eye on the competition and what the customers are saying about them?
Well, today, upwards of 80% of customers say that the experience is as important as the product or service itself. So if the experience of buying a cake is as important as a cake, the only way that your competition can take your customers is by delivering a better experience. It's probably not by having a better cake. This idea that you're going to out product development your competition is pretty rare. Like, it's not impossible, but it's much more likely that your competition will deliver a better experience than a better product or service, in a meaningful way. What's good about that is that when competing brands start to differentiate on experience, because it's differentiated, that's when customers tend to talk about it a lot, right? And they tend to leave it in reviews, and they tend to leave it in social media, and you just start to see evidence of the differentiation. And that's why smart brands need to always be doing really aggressive listening to their competition, and not just brand names, but product names and related terms, just a more nuanced approach to listening to sort of pick up some of that early warning detection system if competitors are doing something meaningfully different on the experience side.
Yeah, I love the aggressive listening. I interviewed Chris Voss, and he talks about active listening. He's it's a lot more, takes a lot more attention because you are purposeful on your listening and what's being said and maybe what's not being said. So I love the attention to listening. One thing that really stuck out at me with me in the book is you talk about that trust matters more than truth. That was pretty profound. Obviously it's kind of, you get you get some things that kind of stump you a little bit at the very beginning. You're like, wait, what? How does that work? So maybe dig in that a little bit for us.
Well, as it turns out, that part of the book ended up being fairly prescient, I believe. I mean, if you just look at modern American society, I think the truthfulness of the trust is more important than truth statement will bear itself out, right? Like, it was 6 years ago now where people started to coin the term "we live in a post-factual world." The reality is that truth is now circumstantial, but trust isn't, right? And so we're going to trust individuals or news sources or politicians or brands, and that trust supersedes whatever sort of facts that we used to rely upon, because we've kind of gotten to this point now where facts are based on who you hear them from, which I have some real concerns about where that ends, frankly, as a political science major. But and that's why I think all of that also sort of explains at some level the rise of influencer marketing, the rise of user-generated content, the rise of employee-generated content, the importance of having internal thought leaders create some of your content from a marketing standpoint. Like it's all related, which is we're going to believe our tribe, whatever that may be, and sort of everybody else is ipso facto wrong, and that has huge implications for marketing and CX.
Yeah, well, this has been great. I wrap up every podcast with two questions, Jay, and the first one is, what book or person in customer service or customer experience has influenced you the most in the past year?
Okay.
And then the second one is, if you could leave a note to all customer service professionals and it's going to hit everybody's desk Monday at 8 a.m., what would it say?
First one, I'm fortunate because I read a lot of books and review a lot of books and all that. I get exposure to a lot of books in the category and others. Probably my favorite book that had the most impact on me, just because I really love the way it's stitched together this year, is The Experience Maker from my buddy Dan Genghis. Terrific book. I used to produce Dan's podcast, and it's really, really good. And I like the book a lot. It's a book that has enough meat on the bone for a customer experience professional, but also terrific as sort of a starter course for a business executive who doesn't fully sort of understand why CX is important. So I thought Dan did a really nice job with The Experience Maker. It's a fun read too, which makes it better. Some CX books are really good, but also not a fun read. It's sort of a nature of the category, I think, at some level. And if I was going to leave a note on the refrigerator of customer experience, it would be to think like marketers, and more so internally than externally. What drives me crazy, Nick, is that so many brilliant, caring, deeply accomplished customer experience professionals have a really hard time getting their recommendations put into practice. And it's not because the recommendations aren't good or the research isn't sound. It's because they're just not good enough at marketing their own conclusions and their own recommendations inside their own organization. I think what CX professionals suffer from in many cases is actually thinking about the customers too much. And that may sound controversial, but it doesn't matter how much you think about the customer if you can't first sell it to your boss and your boss's boss. So be better at marketing CX internally if you want to actually have an impact on CX externally.
Nice. Mic drop moment right there.
There you go. Bam.
Well said. So let's say all of my listeners said Jay was amazing. The value that he brought was outstanding. How can my listeners continue to get the value of Jay Baer?
Will work for tequila or barbecue. I think we've established that. So
invite Jay and Nick over for tequila and
absolutely.
Barbecue.
Absolutely. We got it. Actually, I have a new newsletter, relatively new, called the Baer Facts. It comes out twice a month. And each issue, Nick, includes a customer experience or marketing sort of observation and story, paired with a statistic you need to know from recent research. So it all gets contextualized mathematically. And then each issue also includes podcasts that you should listen to. This episode will be included in a future issue. It includes books you should read. It includes a tequila you should drink because I got to stay on brand. It includes a life hack and a couple other things. So there's a whole bunch of different little pieces, and it's been going great. Folks seem to really enjoy it. It's called the Baer Facts. Comes out every other Thursday night, and you can subscribe at no cost, of course. Thebaerfacts.com, and that is BAER, thebaerfacts.com.
I love it. Go ahead and subscribe to Jay Baer's Baer Facts.
Thank you.
If somebody goes one step further and says, man, I just got this association, I'm looking for this amazing keynote speaker, how do they find you outside of the Baer Facts?
Yeah, easy enough. jbaer.com, and the Baer Facts is located right there. So jbaer.com has all my info on speaking, consulting, investing, and everything else. We would love to work with you. I'm doing, whatever, 100 workshops a year. So would love to be part of it.
Very cool. Jay, you caught my attention at the barbecue, but you added a ton more value after that. So I appreciate
Let's do another
time.
episode. It's just barbecue. I'm game.
So on the next interview, we'll be talking strictly barbecue with Jay.
Yeah, do it in person though. We got to do it like backyard somewhere
with barbecue all over our face. So
I love it.
Jay, thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.